If I were to describe the blade that I think got buffed the most over the course of the game's history, I would definitely say that would be Pandoria. This was a blade that was easily one of the worst offensive blades in the game before New Game Plus gifted her with one of the most insane buffs this game has ever seen. Initial reactions were wondering if she might be the best blade in the entire game, and for a while she really did seem incredibly strong, but over time we kind of figured out that she was a bit more niche than initially expected, and not the all-powerful blade that we initially thought, since she has some glaring weaknesses that make her difficult to slot on many teams when going for the most optimal and fastest kills on enemies. Does this make her bad? Absolutely not. A blade with the abilities she has cannot be considered bad at all, and that should be glaringly apparent when you see the damage she can do. It's just that her damage unfortunately doesn't have the strongest specific uses in many scenarios. One thing I will say is I think Pandoria is easily in the top 5 for most fun blades to use in this game, and in this video we're going to talk about her and how to set her up to give her the highest single target DPS in the entire game. And we're also going to talk about her strengths and weaknesses. If you enjoy these guides, please be sure to subscribe to the channel and look forward to all of the future blades because I will cover all of them. So Pandoria is another exclusive blade who can only be used on Zeke initially and then later on Rex. Just forget about ever using her on Rex though, because she is far, far worse than she is on Zeke for one very simple reason. So when New Game Plus came out, it allowed the drivers to access their hidden Affinity Charts, which were extra skills that they could only access in New Game Plus. On Zeke's hidden Affinity Chart, he had this very special unique ability called Unleash Shining Justice. If you are at max affinity in battle with Pandoria and press R plus X, Zeke becomes a god for 90 seconds. This buff will double all damage no matter what, since it's separate from all other sources of damage, give him immunity to reactions like knockback, blowdown, break, and all that stuff, increase his movement speed by 50% if you want to run around really fast during battle, and finally give him 3.5 times the normal amount of art speed. This effectively increases his DPS by 7 times the usual amount when using arts, and can also double all of his special damage, but to be honest, it's really all about the arts. This buff single-handedly turned Pandoria into an extremely high DPS blade from one of the lowest in the game initially. It is this skill that makes Pandoria a blade good enough to be A tier, and without this skill, she is absolutely not a good blade. It's unfortunate that this buff is locked so late in New Game Plus, because before that, she really is not that good at all, and I'll be sure to discuss that in this guide, so let's get into everything else. Pandoria is an offensive blade, and that is what she is all about. Defenses are low as you would expect at 5% and 10% being among the lowest in the game, but her auto attack stat is the second highest in the entire game, which is at least a nice benefit of her. Her critical hit rate is unfortunately not that great, but there are ways to fix this that can make her very powerful, but we will discuss that later. Her strength mod is a pretty unremarkable 10% as well, but her cooldown is at least a 5, making her available in combat pretty frequently. Although she isn't really a blade that ever benefits from swapping, since you have to stay on her to use the Eye of Shining Justice. Let's check out her Affinity Chart and discuss it. The first skill we have here is Sudden Spark. It increases auto attack speed by 20% at level 1, increasing to 30% at level 5. I'm just going to come out and say it. I think this is the single worst skill in the game. And it isn't just because of what it does necessarily, it's because it shouldn't even exist. Not only is increasing auto attack speed not that useful since Pandoria and Zeke can basically infinitely cancel arts anyway, but Pandoria is the only character who has this weapon. There's no point of comparison here at all. There is absolutely no reason to increase her auto attack speed when it should have just been the level 5 speed to begin with, instead of dedicating an entire skill slot to fixing an issue that shouldn't even exist. Even other bad skills do something. This skill is a complete waste of a skill slot, and even if it wasn't, it's just an awful skill anyway. But since Pandoria is the only blade that uses this weapon, the speed really should have just been sped up automatically instead of purposely making it slow and having a skill to fix it. If you just made this skill Affinity Max Attack or something, Pandoria already could have been so much better. This skill baffles me with its existence, honestly. Moving on, Pandoria's second skill is Thunder Blast. At level 1, it adds a 60% chance to annul guard on your attacks, rising to 100% at level 5. Honestly, this is a great skill for Pandoria, especially with the Eye of Shining Justice. Your primary objective is to continue your art spam and dish out as much damage as possible. This skill makes it impossible for that to get interrupted by deflections, and ensures you won't lose DPS to blocks either. And considering you don't have any reactions to worry about that can interrupt you either, you're pretty much just free to spam until you die. Even if the enemy is using a move that gives them a 100% block rate, this will pierce right through that and let you do full damage. This is definitely a very good skill that is very beneficial to Pandoria in general. Pandoria's final skill is Quickest Purple. It boosts art recharge by 30% at max affinity at level 1, rising to 50% at level 5. In a pure vacuum, I'd say this skill is very good. For Pandoria, it really depends on if you're using the Eye of Shining Justice or not. I assume everyone knows to use art recharge pouch items by this point in many situations, and without the Eye of Shining Justice, this skill is completely unnecessary for Pandoria. Zeke's art animations are very slow, and cooldowns are already not that bad, so it doesn't really do anything since you're completely limited by your art speed. This skill is so unnecessary that you can cancel Dynamic Spark Sword into itself extremely easily, for instance. It's honestly a bad skill if it was designed without the Eye of Shining Justice in mind. But if it was designed with the Eye of Shining Justice in mind, this skill is amazing. It is what allows Zeke to infinitely cancel his arts when they're 3.5 times faster. If you max out your art recharge at 1.0, you can cancel your core 3 arts into themselves thanks to this skill reducing art recharge even further, and it allows you to have so much more DPS than you would have otherwise. I honestly have to believe this skill was designed with Eye of Shining Justice in mind just because it seems useless on Pandoria normally, but becomes such an amazing skill when your art animations are faster. All in all, these last 2 skills are very good skills for Pandoria, but the first skill is just so terrible. This also leaves her with the weakness of no additive damage increases on her skill tree, which can definitely hurt DPS, and if the first skill was replaced with one, she could be even better than she already is. If you have the Eye of Shining Justice, Pandoria's specials honestly don't matter too much since I doubt you'll be using them frequently, but they're still worth discussing at the very least. Pandoria's first special is Lightning Force. It is an ether-based single-hit special with a 25% critical hit modifier. It starts off at a damage ratio of 270 at level 1, which is one of the lowest in the game, but it rises to 550 at level 5 and 600 at max affinity, which is the 3rd highest in the game behind Corvin and Numa. Don't ask me why it scales like this because I honestly have no idea, and while a high damage ratio is nice, it being only single hit makes it really awful in chain attacks and for getting party meter and for overdrive and all that stuff as you might imagine. It's also not particularly fast either, so I can't really call it a good special regardless of its ratio. Its bonus effect increases damage to machines, which is extremely situational, but I suppose if you're against machines then it might be a more powerful option to consider and a decent electric special outside of chain attacks. Pandoria's level 2 special is Electric Circus. It is a 2-hit physical-based special that also has a 25% critical hit modifier. Once again, it's not fast at all and not a great option for chain attacks in most situations because of its low hit count and speed. And to be honest, using specials is missing out on Pandoria's main strengths. Once again, it has interesting scaling, starting at a ratio of 360 at level 1, which is again among the lowest in the game, but rises to the 3rd highest of 640 at level 5 and 725 at max affinity. To be honest, the effect here is pretty good since it boosts critical damage, and if you aren't using the Eye of Shining Justice, that can make this a very nice special. But Pandoria doesn't have the greatest critical hit rate either, so that can make it weaker if you aren't using options to buff that as much as possible. All in all, this is an okay special. Pandoria's level 3 is almost the exact same story here. It's a single-hit ether-based special that again has a high damage ratio, starting at 450 at level 1, which is low, but increases to 750 at level 5 and 850 at max affinity, which is among the highest in the entire game. It again has a 25% critical hit modifier and has a critical damage buff as its bonus effect. It is also very slow as a special because everything about Pandoria just seems to be slow, and this kind of stuff is why without Eye she is not a good blade at all. Honestly, there really isn't much else I can say about this. Critical damage is good if it actually crits, but it's just not a good option outside of that, and there's easily better ways to get damage. Pandoria's level 4 is Sonic Thunder Slash. This is easily her best special. For one, it's 16 hits, which admittedly doesn't matter as much for level 4s, and it also comes with the same benefits of all level 4s invincibility and easy fusion combo setups, but this special is very nice for giving her a 60% critical modifier, while also having critical damage as an effect, which is very nice and makes it an extremely strong special. The damage ratio is 1,150 at all times, making it a great option even early on in the game, and one of the highest level 4 damage ratios in the game. And honestly, if you want to use Pandoria specials, this is probably your best bet. The weakness is that if you don't have the Eye of Shining Justice, good luck getting to it with how insanely slow Zeke's arts with her are. All around though, for max DPS Pandoria with Eye, none of her specials really matter all that much, but before they can be decent options if you want to get the most out of Pandoria. For core chips, you should absolutely go with the Tachyon chip because it will increase your critical damage by 25%, and if you want as much damage as you possibly can get. Sure, you lose out on some critical hit rate with the Moon Manor core chip, which can get it up to 30%, but it doesn't matter since for the most benefit, you'll definitely want to buff Zeke's critical hit rate with an external source. For Aux Cores, Pandoria is lucky enough to have 3 slots, which is a benefit, and I'd say just go all in on damage. Affinity max attack, outdoor indoor attack, and whatever enemy you're fighting hunter. Pandoria doesn't have any additive damage on her skill tree, so all additive damage will have additional benefits. Plus, since all damage is doubled with the Eye, you get even more benefit out of any kind of damage increase. For accessories, the 2 requirements are going to be Noise Dampener or an Eye Patch, to increase your damage ratio when you cancel arts so you can do insane damage, along with Crimson Headband to increase all of your critical damage even further to essentially more than double your damage when you get a critical hit. For my final accessory, I like playing risky, so I went with a Bisque Mask for the high additive damage increase, but safer options would be a Loincloth accessory for additive damage, or an Edge attachment to increase your weapon tower and damage that way. An Avant-Garde medal can be used for safety if you're running a setup where Zeke has to worry about taking aggro. For pouch items, since Zeke and Pandoria both like meat, just using a 0.4 art recharge meat in your second pouch slot is all you need to ensure you get maxed out art recharge. Just make sure the other pouch item is any 0.4 art recharge item. You might even be able to run a 0.3 art recharge item, and you'll hit the cap of 1.0. Now, the blade I would absolutely recommend running as support for Zeke no matter what is the Aegis Girls because of Numa giving the entire party 100% critical hit rate and taking all aggro no matter what. This is very good for fixing Zeke's low critical hit rate issue and makes his DPS skyrocket. Other fantastic options are Dagas for the 120% additive damage buff, and Tora for driver combo support, which is always amazing. I also have Strength Mod Axes on Zeke to get that as high as possible for maximum strength damage as well, and you could also run Fiora instead of Numa for her 40% critical hit rate buff for the entire party, getting him up to 60% and 69% at max affinity or something. But I think Numa is a superior option in almost every situation since she can also contribute to driver combos with her topple art along with Tora. All in all though, this is probably what you should go with if you are going to use the Eye of Shining Justice, and if not, then maybe a more focus on support since Pandoria's damage is very lacking without it. With all that being said, let's take a look at Pandoria practically. So first of all, let's quickly address Pandoria without the Eye of Shining Justice here. So the one thing to note is that your arts are much slower without it, and this makes your DPS much worse, and it's one of the reasons Pandoria is not very impressive. The art speed being so bad makes it hard to charge up your specials and use them, which means you're not going to get a lot of damage that way either, and all around it's just not that great. Sure, you can benefit from the same supportive strategies as Eye of Shining Justice Pandoria, but your damage is just so gimped overall. And there would be so many better offensive blade options to use instead. The art speed really holds everything back here, and without the Eye of Shining Justice, it really is just almost not worth using Pandoria at all. The only really good thing you have going for you is Stratospheric Thunder being a good launch art and still being decently fast, being his fastest art, but overall, just stick to using Pandoria with Eye, I would say post-game. If you want to use her without it, then just follow the same kind of principles and it might end up working pretty well. However, with the Eye of Shining Justice, I'm going to show you how you can fight Tyranitar Kuradil on Bringer of Chaos. So one little trick I did here was set up the Eye of Shining Justice for aggroing Kuradil so I can instantly start the fight and not have to wait 8 seconds activating Eye of Shining Justice. And that's good for just saving some extra time on the timer in this fight. It doesn't really do anything else besides that. But you'll see my damage is just so significantly more. Not only is it more damage, but I'm doing it much more often thanks to the art speed just being incredible. And with the pouch setup I have, I can infinitely cancel my arts into each other. So I'd recommend starting your art cancel after the 3rd auto attack because that gives you a 30% damage bonus to all of your arts in an infinite chain here. And you can just wreck any enemy. On Bringer of Chaos against super bosses like this is the fastest strategy that I know of. This is one Zeke's probably his most powerful niche use with Pandoria here. You could just melt super bosses on Bringer of Chaos, and chain attacks are not more viable in this case just because you don't have the good chain attack damage. And Eye of Shining Justice will actually last long enough to actually kill the rest of them. The problem with Eye of Shining Justice on Bringer of Chaos Challenge Mode is that enemies have too much HP and defenses to allow Eye of Shining Justice to last long enough, so it's not actually that great of a strategy. Still, you can see right there, Bringer of Chaos, Tyranitar, and Kuradal, 53 seconds. Very, very fast. I don't know if any strategy is faster. Here's going to be Zeke against Ophion. I'm going to be using Dagas as support instead of Tora here, just to show you that you can increase your damage even further with additive damage total like that, which is very nice. And once again, you can see the value of crit right there. When I'm not critting, my attacks do significantly less, and that is why Numa is so valuable here. All in all, though, this is Ophion on normal mode, and he goes down really, really fast here, as you might expect. No super boss stands a chance against Zeke when he's like this. And it's worth addressing the elephant in the room now. How does Zeke function on challenge mode? Well, this is one of the things and one of the reasons Pandoria is not quite as useful as we initially thought. Eye of Shining Justice only lasts as long as there are enemies on the field. So if you finish a phase and use Eye of Shining Justice in that phase, you cannot use it again the rest of the entire challenge mode battle. You cannot use it every phase or anything like that. So this means you're stuck with Gimped Pandoria for all but one phase unless enemies spawn during the same phase you're fighting other enemies. And that's just not always going to be a viable option. And not to mention, some of these enemies on challenge mode have too much HP for Pandoria to kill within the 90-second time limit you have. And especially within Numa's 60-second time limit that you have for the critical hits. This doesn't mean you can't use it. If you're using it on normal mode or easy mode, then you can use the Eye of Shining Justice to have some pretty good success here, because you won't have to worry about the enemies having too much health in that case. But you're still not going to have the absolute optimal strategies here, because chain attacks are just simply better on normal mode for killing enemies. Still, you can kind of see, even on the most powerful challenge here, we can wreck the most powerful enemy. Once he loses his insane ether defense buff from the Enrage, we'll be able to just combo him like normal and just kill him like any other Tyrannic Titan Kuradal. Although he does have more HP than normal, of course. I think Topple and Launch give him a lot of benefits, because Ultimate Lightning Fury / Max gets bonus damage to Topple, and you always get 50% extra damage to launch enemies too, which is really nice. And that makes driver combos really valuable, especially because Zeke can launch himself, which is also very nice. So while Zeke can be useful in challenge mode, I'd say challenge mode is easily his biggest weakness. Or not his, but Pandoria specifically, because Zeke's actually still amazing with other blades, of course. But just the fact that Eye of Shining Justice can only be used basically during one phase makes it severely limited, and you'll be stuck with a very gimped and bad Pandoria the rest of the time. The 90-second timer also hurts against a lot of enemies that have even more health. And this makes his viability not as great as you might want it to be. As a final note, if you don't have support from someone like Numa or Ferora to buff your critical hit rate, and don't have like Tora or Dagas to buff your additive damage total, then your damage is also going to be much more lacking than it would have been normally. Zeke gets a lot of benefit from having extra sources of damage increases, because like I already said, the Eye of Shining Justice just flat out doubles his damage. So if you don't have that kind of stuff, that is another weakness of his, and he won't be doing as much DPS as you might want him to. And this can also allow certain blades to out DPS him in certain scenarios, like Crossset or Fiora. And while Zeke is still good, he definitely relies a lot on support, and challenge mode in general is definitely not his strong suit. Or Pandoria, I mean, not Zeke himself. All around, though, Pandoria still has some insane DPS if you set her up right, and she is extremely fun to use. And her damage alone makes her a significantly strong blade no matter what, even if she isn't the most useful. I think that's going to cover it for this guide specifically. Eye of Shining Justice is very powerful, but more situational than you might expect. And without the Eye, Pandoria is not that great. Still, she's a very fun blade, and I think you guys will enjoy using her if you can maximize her damage. I hope you all learned something useful from this guide, and as always, thank you all for supporting my content. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe if you enjoyed, and come back for future videos. I hope you all have a wonderful day.